Hi everyone, and thank you for joining us for this session. I'm Diane Smothers. I'll be the moderator for this session, and I'm welcoming Annie, Stacey, Samantha, and Ashley as they present their session, Journey to IDEA 2.0, Moving from Education to Action. There's just a few logistical items to go over before we get started. This session is being recorded. Captions should be available during the session by clicking on the live CC button at the bottom of the Zoom window. The Q&A feature is available. If you would use that to answer any questions, there'll be some time at the end to answer those questions. Use the chat for general comments and for technical issues. Nicole will be monitoring the chat for questions and comments, and she's also going to be adding some links into the chat. One is for collaborative resource sharing. If you have any recommendations that you'd like to share with all of us, please do that in the recommended resources document. And due to the Google Documents limitations, we ask that you close out of that document after you've added a resource, and please do not share that on Twitter. Also, there'll be a link for the code of conduct showing up in the chat. And to save some time, I'm going to turn it right on over to our presenters. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that introduction. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for coming to our presentation today entitled Journey to IDEA 2.0, Moving from Education to Action. We are all members of Grand Valley State University's Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Accessibility Committee. So that's where the idea comes from: inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility. Today, we're going to be sharing a little bit about our committee's evolution. As you can see on our title slide, we're actually the IDEA 2.0 committee because we are the second iteration of this committee. And we're here to tell you all about how we made that journey from our original IDEA committee, which was focused largely on education, to the second iteration, which is focused on action and systemic issues. My name is Samantha Minnis, and I am a liaison librarian at Grand Valley State University, GVSU, and a member of both the original IDEA committee and the 2.0 committee. These are the rest of your co-presenters today, and we are all members of the committee together, along with a few others who weren't able to be here with us today. And we'll be introducing ourselves as we move along throughout our presentation today. So for those of you who might not be familiar with Grand Valley State University, or GVSU, it is a public university in West Michigan with just over 22,000 students. We are a predominantly white institution, a PWI, and we have 38% first-generation college students. We are also a Hispanic serving institution and veteran certified. For today, though, we're going to focus specifically on the libraries because that is the way our IDEA work is focused. It is focused internally on the libraries and our services. So we at the University Libraries are spread across 4 locations across 3 campuses. We have currently, I think, right around 62 employees in 3 employment classes, plus some adjunct and temporary employees. We are also primarily white, but we are seeing some results from our inclusive hiring practices. So we have moved from 2% in 2017 to 12.5% in 2022. We also have key leadership and stakeholder buy-in on IDEA work in our library. So Annie, who will be presenting today, is the Dean of the Libraries and serves as one of the co-chairs of the committee. So we work closely with our leadership team, which is really lucky and makes for some powerful changes. Inclusion is a value. So anytime we have done any kind of values exercise with faculty and staff at the library, we see inclusion come through as a value, but we still have opportunities for growth as an organization, which of course we're going to dig into a little bit today. So at this point in the conference, I think we've all seen and hopefully are familiar with the code of conduct specific to the conference. And we would like to propose these collective engagement principles, which we feel align with the code of conduct of the conference, and then also mirror some of the engagement principles that we use at the library when we are gathering in different spaces. So I'm going to read these out, and I would invite you, if you've had others you'd like to add, to please do put those in the chat. So we will not speak for others, and we will not ask someone else to speak for others. We will practice active listening and listen more than we individually speak. We will also prioritize the voices of BIPOC individuals. And practically speaking, in the chat or in the Q&A, if you'd like to put an asterisk before your question or comment, if you feel comfortable identifying as BIPOC, we will prioritize those comments. We will respect people's names and gender pronouns. We will give credit where credit is due. We also ask that you hold most questions for the end, but we do welcome questions throughout, and we'll do our best to be watching chat and the Q&A. So now that you've heard a little bit about us, we would like to learn a little bit more about you. If you're comfortable, please share to the chat your current role, such as library director, manager, supervisor, your name, and the institution where you work.
So thank you, and keep those coming. As my co-pilots monitor those, I will start moving through my portion. We're going to focus now on moving from a performative to a systematic approach as a predominantly white institution library. So some of the things that we did was to really anchor in our organizational values and our philosophy. And so as part of my onboarding as the new dean, which is now 5 years in the past, I engaged deeply with the colleagues across the library. And as I considered what would be needed to build on and honor the existing culture, we co-created workplace principles that really centered demonstrable respect for one another and cognitive empathy in all that we did. And we worked to articulate that we weren't using respect as a white-coded word for professionalism and tone policing, but really about the rights of one another. During this time as well, a group of colleagues set out to ask, what if we brought the same compassion and learning mindset that we use with students to our interactions with our colleagues? So inspired by change management through the lens of appreciative inquiry and interpersonal effectiveness, they led a program to deepen our interpersonal skills. And we felt that was really important foundational skills in order to advance inclusion and equity. Because if we couldn't give each other feedback or have hard conversations, then we were putting double tax on any time a microaggression might occur. So they also, this also built on many years of inclusion, diversity, equity development that the libraries had engaged in prior to my arrival. So in parallel as well, we had, we also, the leadership model really started to shift to participatory management anchored in strengths-based approach to build a culture of care. So though we still have a hierarchy, we work to flatten the gap between the power differentials so that department heads had access to the dean, that we were working closely where 80% of the decisions are made in a much more collaboratively approach. So the leadership worked actively during that time to grow our skills as leaders, as managers, but also in terms of what it meant to have inclusive, adaptive, appreciative, and transformational leadership. We also started to offer leadership growth opportunities to others throughout the library, regardless of formal positions. We enhanced communication and engagement and made explicit the implicit that existed in many of our processes. And these changes were really anchored in developing an equity-minded approach to our workplace, where we could create certainty and transparency. So in many ways, we set out to focus on personal responsibility while fostering a culture of accountability that would recognize our shared humanity and intentionality towards our growth. We wanted to make sure that we did our work before we really grew diversity so that we weren't doing checkmark diversity and actually causing, in my mind at that point, intentional harm by not being ready. And so here's our high-level overview of our journey. So looking at our path towards inclusion, we noticed that we were one organization, yet we used 3 different methods in our journey over the period of almost 6 years. And each pieces built upon one another, allowing our colleagues to engage in the process and to grow alongside our organizational culture. So starting in 2016, the library took active steps to become more inclusive for their users. This in part was driven by a greater commitment on our campus to grow the diversity of our student body. And so they engaged in trainings and professional development to understand where bias may exist and how to be allies. And during that time, a working group led the professional development efforts. In 2017, when I arrived, we challenged our colleagues to move from desiring a culture of inclusion to having an active practice of inclusion. So as part of these efforts, we engaged in a multi-month facilitation to identify what our commitment to inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility were. We then created a standing committee at that time to craft a statement of commitment. What were the values we would bring to the work? What working definitions were we using that we could share with our colleagues so we were all using the same words for the same thing? And also early efforts were really about visible engagement with our campus community around IDEA, including the book displays, but also the affinity outreach to the affinity group. The committee was incredibly active and successful. By 2020, much of their work had been normalized into existing job descriptions and built into it, which was our hope, to make it everybody's work. So as we looked forward to what was needed next, we really wanted to seek more systemic changes within the organization. And so we created a new committee that would work with the libraries and its leadership to activate the work while fostering the fact that this is everybody's work. And so some sample, Samantha already talked about our success with inclusive hiring. We're also doing a lot of work around our collections, learning circles. But in the coming year, we've redesigned some of our spaces. We're working on our art. In the coming year, we will be adding competencies to everyone's job based on their job. So how does the web librarian bring equity to his position? How does a liaison librarian bring equity to their position and inclusion? So we're really trying to target it within each job in the accountabilities, and then some shared competencies so that it will, moving forward, also live fully into our annual reviews. So some of the lessons learned along the way were that you need to start from where you are with a really clear vision and a why. You need to acknowledge where you are without judgment, right? So we can be doing our best right now and still be better. And so it was really important for me as a leader to articulate why this work was important for us as a library, but even for me personally as a leader who has a history of poverty, is an immigrant, English second language, and is disabled. And then help people find connections to their personal values to show that, in fact, they already are aligned, and help them grow that. So that first step is about the hearts and mind, and we create a compelling vision of the benefits and positive movement it will create by being clear on the purpose and ensuring the others understood why. And then we move authentically and with integrity throughout the work. But eventually, hearts and minds isn't going to be the answer to systemic racism and oppression in libraries. And so we want to build IDEA into every aspect of the work, right? So that desire for inclusion, it's not enough. It needs to be embedded throughout the work, the organization, be part of the hiring and the review process. And then if we want systems level sustained change, we need to make sure that our practices and procedures are being evaluated and valued in a way that fosters that. And also that we're not condoning things that are not in alignment with that. So we want to build values check-ins as part of whole employee life cycle from the hiring, right? So we're not hiring for fit, or we're hiring for values alignment. We're open about our culture so they make an informed decision as well as know what we won't condone. And then empower others to lead from where they're at. So good leadership is really about clarity of expectation and role. And so if we empower others to join in the work, to lead from where they're at and be recognized for their contribution, I certainly, we need to be conscious in how we do that. So I talked a lot about the locus of control, agency, and sphere of influence. As a PWI, there is still also a need for clear signaling that what feels performative, we also need to put up those road signs so people know we're committed, but then we need to do the work and demonstrate we're doing the work. And so we need to signal that we are not in fact neutral, and that we can then adapt our work so that others have more space, that their comfort, that folks with marginalized identities see the space as theirs, comfort is accounted for. And we need to dig deeply by questioning our processes, practices, policies, system, in order to surface where white supremacy culture is at play, but also where perfectionism is creating barriers. And I found it really important to acknowledge that while equity lives in our systems, inclusion is done and undone through our daily acts. And I realized I didn't introduce myself. I'm the Dean of Libraries. My pronouns are she, her, hers.
Thanks, Annie. Everyone, I'm Stacey. I am the Programs and Operations Manager for University Libraries. My pronouns are Zer or they, them. I also just want to know I'm newer to the library profession. So as Annie mentioned, Grand Valley is a predominantly white institution, and there's a need for clear signaling and systems change. Annie also articulated the value of questioning and reflecting, which is what we'll do now. We asked why our IDEA 2.0 committee is all white, and we want to share our observations and reflections on this question, as well as our position at this early juncture of the IDEA 2.0 committee efforts. Our first observation being currently that over 85% of the library employees are white. And in the next 2 slides, we'll unpack more context and perspective regarding our starting place in this work. So the question of the composition of the University Libraries IDEA Committee, we want to model and use a model of inquiry that we intend to cultivate as a habit in all of our work, particularly regarding IDEA. And the first step is to take stock and ask, what is going on? In addressing this question, we seek to gather information coming from a place of critical, non-judgmental curiosity. And we do this to develop context and get a better understanding of limitations. It's important to note that the limitations of each of our individual perceptions and keep this in account while working to avoid mistaking or making assumptions, and then recognizing when we do misstep so that we can recalibrate and move forward. The first is our wider environment, right? There's the wicked problems that we all face. The call for participation took place at the start of the pandemic in 2020, and many of us felt the strains on our capacity and time. Our resources were redirected toward the modification of our programs for more remote operations. Our frontline staff were managing variable services, schedules, and in-person operations. Complexity grew. There were staffing changes due to early retirement incentives with the university and other waves of change. Nationally, we had presidential elections and the murder of George Floyd on May 25th, 2020. The visibility of systemic racism in the United States increased and was met with the growing voice of the Black Lives Matter movement. Then there's historical context. There's a growing awareness of structural layers of inequity in our world. And we recognize as a PWI that we're also within a historically white industry and a historically white profession. Power and accountability is another factor that we like to, make sure to recognize. So we're surfacing that it's not the responsibility of our BIPOC colleagues to change a PWI. The responsibility lies with those that have the most capacity, resources, and privilege. The greatest opportunity to change a system is held by those for whom the system was created. It isn't fair to ask those experiencing the most oppression to dismantle that oppression. So those with formal power at our library invited others to use our informal power to join the effort and approach to work from all available angles. We observed that while some people stated an interest or an appreciation for the committee concept, few came forward formally to participate in the committee. And what we gather right now is some factors to be an individual's position within the library. There's the roles within the hierarchy that afford different opportunities and priorities. An individual's positionality, values, and their individual framing and understanding of equity and inclusion. Some of our BIPOC colleagues articulated stress, the additional mental load, again, from national events compounded by navigating their immediate environment, and the daily experiences all left them with a need to prioritize self-care as well as manage everything else that they were facing. We wanted to observe the culture of academia at play, right? Where some of our white colleagues are hesitant, or others to be on the committee because it's a vulnerable place, right? We're making our growth areas exposed. We know we're going to misstep, and that's an uncomfortable thing to do when we're usually coming from a place of expertise. My personal story, I felt compelled to join the committee upon receiving the library's wide invitation, as it spoke to my values. And as a department manager, I first decided to check in with my colleagues and direct reports, as those are the individuals that I serve within the organization, to explore their interests and encourage their participation first. I felt it was particularly important to get the perspective of our BIPOC colleagues, and each articulated that they felt they were beyond capacity at that time. So then I accepted the invitation, and just some perspective on that. One, to represent our department as a non-faculty employment class member. Two, as a programs manager. I felt this was an effective and efficient way during a pandemic when a lot of our in-person activity was tabled, to build cross-departmental relationships, build some critical knowledge, self-awareness, and cultivate some skills for discourse so we could get to important conversations when we return to in-person activity. And then critical to this work too is creating more inclusive environments within the libraries. So I saw the IDEA Committee as a way to put all of these goals into action. So the committee is one facet. The work of IDEA is multi-directional. It has both visible and invisible components. And the visible elements tend to be those that are structural and public facing. The structures include things like formal committees, our espoused values that show up on websites, some of our professional development. Our structural frames tend to be well utilized in higher education. Change through a structural frame, though, is easiest with top-down support. And as we talked about Grand Valley, we're fortunate to have that top-down support from our university president to our library dean. We also have our work supported by a robust inclusion and inequity division at Grand Valley and colleagues within other departments. So each institution, depending on where it's at in its journey, has its own ratio of visible to invisible work. You may find work occurring more at a grassroots level and maybe working to advocate up to leadership in your organization. We believe both the visible and invisible work are important. The theoretical, the practice, the words and actions all have to work toward alignment, as ideas, the work, again, of us all. Another way of saying it is, right, it's not a spectator sport, or as Howard Zinn would say, you can't be neutral on a moving train. So looking at inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility, the true work of inclusion is in the culmination of those small moments and daily acts that may seem less significant or invisible, but are the scaffolding of trust and respect on which the lives of all are improved. Or if not, it stays at the level of rhetoric, at which point our trust can start to deteriorate.
So as Stacey just described, IDEA work is multi-directional. And one of our projects was to investigate the current IDEA work happening in the library, as well as assess how inclusive our culture currently is. So we have been trying to determine how we can best assess our culture in relationship to IDEA. And that's going off of what Annie said about how it's important to know where we are now before we can begin to really move forward. So when we reconvened as the IDEA 2.0 committee, we felt it was important to gather that information. So assessment had actually been a goal in the original committee way back in, I can't even remember what year. We had envisioned doing a policy audit. We struggled with how to assess our policies. We were looking for other models, how would other institutions do it, and we weren't able to find a roadmap that would fit us perfectly. So we created one. Our first realization is that we are actually not a very policy-heavy culture. We tend to operate more with oral traditions and through procedures or best practices. So our quote-unquote dreams of a policy audit were dashed, if I want to be really dramatic about it. But we decided instead that what we really just needed to do was assess our culture. We as committee members tried taking a few different types of assessments built on some different frameworks, and we found some of them difficult to take depending on where our expertise in our sphere was in the library. But eventually we did find a framework that worked well for us, which is the Multicultural Organizational Development Framework, which I'm going to dig into more in a moment. But that really resonated with our goals. We then created an assessment tool, which in our case is a survey. We partnered with a student colleague as well as our institution's statistical consulting center to create our tool. We plan to open up the survey soon, and once we get the results, we plan to evaluate the data and compare it to the framework and make recommendations to our library's leadership as part of larger organizational goal setting and strategic planning initiatives. So this starts to dig in a little bit more to the framework that we're using. The MCOD is divided into 6 stages, which are then grouped into 3 more general stages. So the 6 stages are monocultural organizations, or I'm sorry, the 3 larger stages: monocultural organizations, non-discriminating organizations, and multicultural organizations. We liked this framework for a few reasons. It felt really applicable to everyone's work. It kind of worked out well that each of us in the IDEA committee work in different departments and have very different jobs within the library. And so it showed that we were all able to take this, to look at this model and have it relate to our work. So we feel confident that others throughout the library will be able to relate it to their work as well. The fullest version of the framework, which you can find in our toolkit that we'll share later, also includes recommendations for actions that we can take to move from one stage to the next. So this graphic gives you a little bit more information about the details of each stages. And we'd like to invite you just in a quick moment that if you'd like to take a look and see what reminds you most of your organization, if you feel comfortable sharing that, you may. Otherwise, it might just be a good time for reflection. But this is the framework that we are using. This is just one graphic of part of the framework. So in the interest of time, I'm not going to give you much time to look, unfortunately. I think we'll just move on to the next slide. Okay, so once we had chosen our framework, as I said, we wanted to turn it into an assessment tool so we can get input from everyone through our organization. I want to give a lot of credit to our student colleague who's not able to be here with us today, Alex Hicks. They have done an amazing job of creating this tool. As you can see, it's color-coded with different stages of the framework. So as people take the survey and rate how much they agree or disagree with these statements, it will allow us then to decide where we as an organization belong on that framework. And then we can go back into the framework and start to get an idea of how we might want to recommend changes that will move us from one stage to the next. We had a major concern, of course, in constructing this survey, which is that we are people working in the library, and we want the people who take the survey who work in the library to feel really comfortable taking the survey and to be as honest as possible. So we want to make sure that we're not able to identify anybody or get into any sort of confidential or private information. So we've taken a few steps. First of all of the demographic data that we ask for, both about where does somebody work in the library as well as their personal demographic data, that is optional when taking the survey. And then one of our partnerships with the Statistical Consulting Center is that they will actually have all of the raw data. So we can put some stopgaps in there if we ask for a certain aggregation of data, and if that's going to accidentally identify somebody, if it like limits it to too few people, then they can just tell us no, that we can't have it divided up that way. So that way we won't even have access to people's raw data. We'll only get aggregated data. I also want to give credit to the Statistical Consulting Center. They have done a really wonderful job of helping us create the tool. It's been a long time since I've had a research methods class, and since I've gotten deep into statistics and constructing a survey, and they've answered questions like, why do we need to have a neutral option, and where should this question be in the survey, with just a lot of grace and information. So we hope to distribute the survey very soon and begin to process the results and make our recommendations during the summer.
Hi, my name is Ashley Rosener, she, her pronouns, and I am a liaison librarian at Grand Valley State University. I will share the obstacles and challenges we've encountered, as well as some that we see generally in this type of work. So we define obstacles as barriers encountered in our committee's work. These barriers and obstacles must be addressed, even if they cannot be fully solved, in order to move forward. At our library, we have primarily encountered human resource obstacles, as in individuals having little time to take on new projects, as well as fewer colleagues as folks retire. Existing or missing policies are another obstacle many encounter, and it can take time and energy to change as they are approved by committees and bureaucratic procedures are followed. Our strategy was to make changes and incorporate new practices alongside looking at and changing policies rather than waiting until policies were changed to do the work. Related to policies are systems in higher education that have strong historical and cultural foundations and were not designed with IDEA in mind. Resistance to change from leadership at an organization can be a difficult obstacle to overcome. We are fortunate not to have faced that within our libraries. Environmental obstacles can be challenging as well. While our campus continues to grow in being actively anti-racist, we are well supported in our IDEA work on campus. Our university has an active division on inclusion and equity, and there is an explicit charge for racial equity and inclusion with an action plan and resources. One's larger environment can be an obstacle as well. For us, our main campus and library are located in Allendale, a rural suburban conservative community in West Michigan. Challenges can be ongoing issues, sometimes beyond our control, that impact our ability to establish a multicultural and inclusive organization. But we can continue moving this work forward even with these challenges. We have identified challenges relating to time, communication, and culture. We want to acknowledge that culture change takes time, and the pandemic complicated this. Progress needs to be communicated to show what's happening, since not all the work has explicit outcomes or outputs, and it's important to recognize all aspects of progress. As for communication, we worked to share out We held space for emerging needs, noting how important it is to make time for the right work. Throughout this, we worked to show all our library colleagues this was everyone's work and all could contribute in different ways, such as by using an equity lens. We led library-wide activities on how to use an equity lens and how to look for 15% solutions and what small changes were within the locus of control of individuals. Since IDEA is everyone's work, we made sure to share tools for everyone. We also want to note that changing culture is a complex challenge, since organizational culture can include unconscious biases. In order to accomplish this over the years, we've worked to activate leaders throughout the organization, which means encouraging both formal and informal leaders and acknowledging and rewarding their work. We want to conclude with some examples of the IDEA work that has been done around our library. So while our IDEA committee serves as champions of this work, we are involving all our colleagues in a number of ways, such as those shown on this slide. We are providing spaces for our colleagues to collaborate on IDEA work so as to make it everyone's work. We've established workplace principles through conversations with our colleagues, and a few departments have even set up their own collective engagement agreements to ensure inclusive practices. Members of our IDEA committee have held some facilitated conversations and workshops, such as one using the 15% solutions exercise from liberatingstructures.com. This site describes 15% solutions as showing that there is no reason to wait around, feel powerless, or fearful. They get individuals and the group to focus on what is within their discretion instead of what they cannot change. We used this activity to make space for folks to see what small actions they could and can take in their individual work to advance inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility. More recently, IDEA committee members visited all library department meetings to gather feedback on our university libraries IDEA framework to ensure transparency in our process and decision-making in order to co-create the framework. We completed the feedback loop by responding to all questions and concerns that arose during those meetings in a Google document that we then shared out with an invitation for additional questions and feedback. While our IDEA committee has spearheaded conversations, policy change, and workshops, the IDEA work at our library is truly multi-directional, and our colleagues have looked for ways to further inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility in many different ways. Just a few of those examples are shown on this slide. And the picture there is from a book display for Black History Month this year. A couple of our colleagues also organized a virtual wiki edit-a-thon for social justice. Over the summers, our library has multiple learning circles, and some are on IDEA topics, such as reading and discussing the book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. Finally, we've held discussions on how to utilize an equity lens for both individual and collective decision-making. And to show what that equity lens is, so our university libraries IDEA framework includes a section on using an equity lens. According to the Center for Nonprofit Advancement, the purpose of an equity lens is to be deliberately inclusive as an organization makes decisions. It introduces a set of questions into the decision that helps make the decision makers focus on equity in both their process and outcomes. So in order to center an equity lens in our work, we ask questions of our work. These questions listed on the slide are for all of us to reflect on individually and collectively as appropriate. Individually and collectively, we take ownership of our education and generously question the work we do, the plans we make, and the decisions that are implemented with the following questions. And the questions that we ended up deciding upon were inspired from James Madison University Libraries and then edited with input from our university libraries colleagues. And the questions that are on the slide here ask for what purpose, who benefits, whose comfort and sense of safety is centered, who is or could be harmed, who has agency and voice, who can experience and express joy in engaging with the libraries, and what assumptions are we making? So we hope that our session today gave you some ideas as well as questions to take to your institution. Before we transition into the Q&A, I would invite you all to please share to the chat one action you can commit to at your institution within the next month.
We encourage you to keep thinking about that question. What is one action you can commit to your institution? So thank you for those putting them into the library, into the chat, reading them at the same time. This is a really interesting place where that liberating justice 15% exercise, which is available online, can be really helpful, because there is no perfect first step. We just have to get moving and then iterate and recover, not only recover emotionally, but actually recover, like 4-step apologies, because we're going to mess up. This is vulnerable, difficult work. So while you continue to think about that, put it on a Post-it if you don't have time to put in the chat. Just keep mulling that question over. We see the questions are coming in the Q&A, so we will start answering those. Just wanted to point out that we did have one of our student colleagues pull together an annotated bibliography of all the resources that we consulted in creating our assessment framework and our commitment framework. So please feel free to take a look at that. It's available on our Scholars portal. No, not Scholars portal, Scholar Work. Got Ontario on the brain. So I'm going to stop sharing and then we can start working through our Q&A.
Well, thank you so much for this excellent presentation. I'll go ahead and start looking through the Q&A and present those to you. The first one we have is, could you share demographic trends by race in your library? Oh wait, I'm sorry, let me reread that. Could you share demographic trends by race in your library administration, management and department heads, and faculty? For instance, I'm curious to know if the increase in hiring of BIPOC mostly occurred in the lower paid positions.
Yeah, so happy to. In our, so I'll start from our lowest paid position, which for us are unionized library assistants. They're called administrative professional staff for our purpose at our campus. That percentage is 4%. So actually that's where we've seen the least growth while we were continuing to hire quite actively. In part, the growth has been greater at our downtown campuses where public transit is much more easily available to get to work. So we're spread across 2 counties. One of our counties is 65% BIPOC in the city. Grand Rapids itself is 65% BIPOC. The county itself is only about 35. Once you get to where our main library is, it flips to about 12% BIPOC. So we're just looking at very different demographic in those 2 areas. In management, which Stacey is a member of, an administrative professional, these are positions that mandate a bachelor's. We went from 0% to 11%. It's a very small group, it's 9 people. So we have 1. And then in the faculty body, we went from having 1 biracial faculty, so very, very low. And now we have a 14% ratio for our faculty body of BIPOC colleagues. And that does not include as well the ACRL diversity residencies colleagues, because those are in their temporary positions. So I've not been counting them as the change to our demographic.
So the next question is, in addition to inclusive hiring practices, have you considered inclusive promotion and management so that BIPOC employees are promoted to management and administrative levels in the library, not just new hires, but by BIPOC who have been with your library a long time already? Also, how white is your management and administration of the library?
Yeah. So I'll take that one. I'll invite my colleagues. I'm going to say this is one of our biggest growth area. Formal leadership, which includes our department heads and associate dean, is fully white. One of our constraining realities, it's not an excuse, I just want to share the reality, is after I was hired, our campus changed the way we could hire leaders in the libraries. And for anyone who provides leadership to faculty members has to be past contract renewal to be hired. So any leadership change we've had since I've been here have had to be filled since 2018, have had to be filled internally. And so last year was the first time we had a BIPOC faculty go through contract renewal. So we actually have a department head position coming up soon. And so that's one of the pieces that we're talking about. We've already been providing quite a bit of leadership development to all of our BIPOC colleagues. We invite them to it. We don't mandate that they do it. So they are well poised to be competitive if they would like to move into administration. So if that didn't answer the question as well, I am happy to have a follow-up.
Okay, so the next question we have is addressed to Ashley. Ashley, you said that the questions for the equity lens are inspired by JMU and edited with colleagues' input. Who led the discussion and how long did it take to develop the questions you settled on?
Thank you for that question. So a couple of the members of our idea committee led those discussions. We had held kind of an open conversation invited all our library colleagues to attend. And then we had a decent turnout for that. But then following that, we invited input via email, kind of a few different times until we kind of received enough feedback from everyone. And I'd say the process itself took maybe a few months before we kind of landed on those questions.
Okay. Our next question says, our administration talks the talk of IDEA, but puts up walls anytime staff and faculty want to talk about or confront issues with how decisions are made and communicated within the library. Do you have any suggestions for doing work like this when the dean is supportive in word, but not in deed?
Would someone else like to step in?
I can share some ideas that come immediately to mind, but I welcome other ideas, of course, too. I think the first thing that comes to mind is something that Ashley talked about with the 15% ideas, that there really usually are lots of things that we can all do in our sphere of influence. So I think while we are very lucky and happy to have a lot of support from the top down and throughout our organization too, as Stacey mentioned with our Division of Inclusion and Equity, I also think that thinking about how the work can be multi-directional is really helpful, and thinking about where your sphere of influence can be. I also think about the ways in which you can find allies or people who want to also do that work, and whether that's in your organization, I think ideally, or even like thinking like across your organization, so maybe outside of the library. You know, like I know I was a member of our Women's Commission here at GVSU and was able to do some organizing through that group. So trying to think of like who your friends or your buddies can be, either in your immediate circle or a little bit further out. And then, yeah, those are my initial thoughts. And then any chance you have, if you have any chance for input in your organization, to add anything to strategic planning or add anything to goal setting, I would say take every opportunity you can to be the squeaky wheel, like constantly be putting that forward. And then depending on your comfort level, your security level, your desire to rabble rouse, perhaps there's an opportunity to say like, you know, it's interesting that we say this in our values, but we're not seeing it in our goals. Is there a way that we can make that connection more overt? But I recognize I say that with some amount of comfort and privilege where I am at the university. So those are just my initial thoughts. I hope something was helpful.
I want to scaffold a little bit on what Samantha shared. In part, I think Samantha is a great rabble rouser. She also does it with a very generative, solutions-oriented focus that makes it really hard to a leader to actually say, well, that's rabble rousing. You're just being disruptive. So she asks of like, how might we questions, which then you as a leader ideally have to then answer. And so I encourage lots of generative solutions-oriented rabble rousing. I will say in my context, for me, the positionality is different. Is how do you advance this work within a campus that where the commitment and actions, there's a lag between the two. And so when the library was the first on our campus, like as an organizational unit, to use the language of anti-racism, anti-oppression, and to actually build it into our hiring, to build it into now increasingly into our jobs, you know, building it into our values. So really, for me, it's now as the provost has informed me, I'm leading a lot of this work at academic affairs level. And I have a spectrum of dean colleagues who think this is important or not. The business college, this may surprise you, feels that diversity of thought is really all they'll ever need, and inclusion is implicit. I vociferously disagree with them. So what I keep trying to do is look at where their goals are and bring them from where they're at, right? So if they were doing active harm that I was witnessing, of course I would call them out on that. But like, what's the next step? So for them, I'm giving them kind of like a 0.1 mile marker, whereas our College of Education is like, we're ready for the marathon. Like, what advice do you have? So part of it is trying to find, how do you tie it back to their values and their own action, like use their own words. I became a leader in libraries so I could dismantle the system from the inside. So that, I don't put that on my CV anymore, but that was my original intent when I became a department head. I didn't like what I was seeing, so I became a department head to change it. And so I did a lot of that by using their language and then reverse engineering towards where I wanted to go so that it makes it harder to say no. I saw Stacey on mute. I didn't know if you want to answer too.
I think you and Sam covered it well. I would just say lean into that advocacy lens. And that is the word too. It is the burden is on the change agent, and it's so hard. And you have to, like, even though you may have justice on your side, like it's, you know, it's, you have to frame it in their other individuals' goals. Like Annie was saying, so it's, you know, are they motivated by competition with another college? Are they motivated by student retention? Is there some way to frame, you know, like, you don't want to feel at all disingenuous, but there, you know, there is meaning of this work, and maybe framing it slightly different ways might move the meter, you know, a centimeter, but every little step counts, right?
Okay. Is there anything further you can share about how you plan to incorporate IDEA into yearly evaluations, if you have them, or tenure and promotion? We are working on this now at my institution.
I think we can tag team that one because you have me, and then we actually have our faculty chair with us, Ashley. So for annual reviews, that for our organization, that falls under my administrative right. And so when we first created our workplace principles, which is really how are we doing our work together to live our values and to help, so we could call each other in about poor behaviors in our culture. We built those in as part of the reflection and as part of the assessment, and it's actually part of the criteria to get an exemplary. So to get an exemplary, you not only have to have the outcomes, but you have to be modeling this really healthy process and approach. So that's kind of the 3 ways we built it into the annual review. And then last year, the idea actually, the group led the leadership team. So I stood back and was a member to create a library-wide goal around inclusion. So then it meant it's part of our assessment on how people progress. So I'll turn it over to Ashley around tenure and promotion.
Yeah, and so I believe as we start to explicitly incorporate IDEA work into position descriptions, that provides a really great way for people to speak to that at their annual reviews, as well as tenure and promotion, to tie it into that, as well as to tie it into goals that are at the department level, as well as the library level. So they're addressing that in those different ways, and it's counting towards that promotion and yearly evaluation.
And our personnel guidelines are up for review in 2 years. So in the meantime, the faculty, actually some faculty together create a racism impact statement that can be used as part of our system. And so we're gonna keep moving on that one.
Okay, the next question we have is, how do you win over detractors, those who do not see this work as important?
I'm looking to Samantha because she was, I feel like I didn't have to deal with detractors here. I did at my old institution.
You know, yeah, like I said, inclusion comes up as a value a lot for Grand Valley, for Grand Valley Libraries whenever we do a value exercise. So we don't run into too many people who are willing to say, we think this is a terrible idea. We don't want to have an idea committee, things like that. What we tend to run into more are situations where when it butts right up against, I'm trying to think of a good example. We really are pretty lucky with the support that we get all throughout the organization. I think we run into a lot of the, like, is this the priority right now? Is this like something we need to do? You know, especially we all just went through a worldwide pandemic. And I think for some people feeling overwhelmed and, you know, we just want to come to work and like, we've got all this work to do, you know, those type of stressors sometimes feel like they come to the top. And then maybe this work can feel less important when I think we can all agree that the pandemic actually surfaced ways in which this work continues to be the most important work. And so I think one way to sort of meet those detractors where they are talk about the ways that this is so intertwined in our work that it's not actually extra work. So my day-to-day work is a lot with instruction, and we talk a lot about inclusive pedagogy practices, anti-racist pedagogy practices. So then it just becomes intertwined. Or we have a wonderful instruction design librarian, Maya, who talks a lot about backwards design and universal design principles. And so those are just something we do. When we are designing our instruction sessions, we just incorporate universal design principles. And so it's not an add-on, it's part of what we do anyway. I know that's sort of a sideways answer to your question, but hopefully that helps a bit. And if anybody else has other thoughts, please.
I think that's well said, Sam. I think it depends on who you're, I think too, like that important, like what risks are you willing to take? Who are those detractors and what power and influence do they have? Again, if it's someone with authority or power over you, you know, you can always speak up, but like they say, it's important to knowledge, like think through all the possible scenarios and risks, and what risks are you willing to take? You know, direct conversations, maybe if you're on a horizontal with somebody, is a good approach. Or yeah, again, it really depends on the organizational culture as to which angle you can take. I'm trying to lean more, I'm someone who likes a challenge, but like lean into more to like what's working and foster the energy that is positive. I think it's a good thing, and maybe just as much as possible steer clear of the detractors if that is an option as a way to go too. And I think just more inquiry, and like we're talking about focusing on the why question. That's another thing that we've done in the libraries, because it's really easy to kind of, well, the how, we just got to keep the wheels turning, you know, but that's a short-term solution, and eventually it will not work anymore. So kind of any kind of dialogue or question asking that can get to like, why are we doing, you know, what is the purpose of a library? I think helps kind of redirect that. So we realize, we're you know, circulating materials, but for a purpose.
Okay, we may have time to sneak in one more question. We've got about 3 minutes left. This one is for Annie. Oh, it just disappeared, so maybe
I answered that one, sorry, since it was just for me. So we have one more about
so we have
disability justice.
Okay, so because this is IDEA and not just DEI, I wonder, are you also assessing worker demographics related to chronic illness and disability? You've talked some about anti-racism, professional development, and approaches, which of course includes anti-ableism. But how has disability justice influenced your efforts?
Yeah, so I'll start and invite others. So I shared briefly during my presentation, I'm disabled, and I came at the work of inclusion from an accessibility advocacy. So I've been involved in that work since the late 1990s, which dates me a little bit. So certainly that's part of adding the A was part of my contribution of really saying, okay, how are we're ADA compliant? Because when I arrived on campus, some of my campus partners were like, disability is not an issue, we're ADA compliant. I was like, that's the legal minimum not to get sued. That is not accessibility. So we started through our spaces, so the question about tracking our workers, or not, because the campus is not. So that's the part where I don't want people to have to self-disclose. What I will say is that the majority of our chronically ill staff have chosen to self-disclose to me so that I'm providing support. We've created an environment where even in meetings, people will say, I'm having, in some cases, not all the meetings, I'm having a mental health day. So there's a lot more neurodivergence has been raised, as well as physical disability. We've also made sure that we don't need an excuse to have a sit-stand desk. As you can see, actually behind Ashley's head, there's a sit-stand part. And so we just really tried to say, like, where is universal design throughout? And the one net new position I got to create as a new dean, I negotiate as part of my pay. If you ever get to do that, that's beautiful, is an instructional design librarian whose core work was to bring universal design of learning. So we've really tried to embed disability justice sort of throughout, because when something is accessible, it benefits everyone. It also benefits someone who has English as a second language, or even just the transparency that making something accessible creates, that I don't have to be on the inner circle to understand a process, because it's been not documented in the sense of I demand documentation with a white-centered culture, but that's the part about the best practices. We do a lot of documentation to demystify how we make decisions. We have a 9-page document about how I go about doing an annual review that goes all the way to how I write, how I set salary, so that people can just know that. So we're really trying to just demystify everything. So for us, I feel like the accessibility is integral throughout. And it's something that I will say Academic Affairs has now adopted along with belonging. So I'm pretty excited.
Well, thank you for answering these questions for us. And thank you again for presenting and attending, those of you who have come to this session. Before we close out, I do encourage you to fill out the feedback survey that's located in Sketch. So thank you again, and we'll see you tomorrow.